again this year?
I don't think it was sold out, but it was.
There were a few more pews, but yeah, good crowd.
Yeah.
Okay, we can go.
Good afternoon and welcome to our special committee of the whole meeting. My name is Councillor Chris McGuire and I'll be chairing for December, and we're going to start with the land acknowledgement. So on December 4th, 2023, we acknowledge that the sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been the site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We're grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We're also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order at 5:02 p.m. and I'll look for an approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Miller, that the December 4th, 2023 Special Committee of the Whole meeting agenda be approved as circulated. All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest for this meeting? Seeing none, we've got the next item on our agenda is priority issue 10.1, the Better Homes Lanark Program Report with CAO Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're bringing this forward this evening, not to necessarily enter the program, but to offer a letter of support to the County of Lanark for their application for FCM funding to support the program. So essentially, it's a program that's delivered at the municipal level using both federal and local monies to encourage energy retrofits, new windows, insulation, energy switching, moving away from fossil fuels like propane and heating fuel to something ideally more environmentally friendly and electric. So there's a range of improvements that would qualify for the program. I should say, though, the report was written in a way that suggests that the lower tier municipalities would essentially borrow from the county's reserves. That's a true statement, but because we're not a lower tier municipality at the county, we would need to look at potentially using our own reserves to fund the project and pay it back over time as we collect the payment through the repayment period. And the mechanism to do that is the Local Improvement Act provisions that allow municipalities to collect money in that way through taxation. So at this point, it's the concept that we wanted to bring forward and see if there was interest in at least sending a letter to support Lanark County's application, and then we could certainly bring it back and work out the details in terms of how much money we would have to commit, what the opportunity costs are of committing that money when we have other things to commit to. So more of the program details could be brought back, but we're bringing forward the concept tonight.
Great, thanks, CAO Morris. Councillor Brennan is going to start off.
Yeah, that's thank you for that. And I support a letter to the county. I would be more comfortable to know when the time comes. Well, I guess we'll make that decision at that time in terms of how much money we're taking from our reserves. But it would be nice to know that little detail before we commit to the program itself. The concept of the program is good, and so I support a letter to the county. But I'd like to know more details.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. CAO Morris, I support your recommendation as well. Just a process piece, can you help me understand why you would have a bylaw for each applicant? Is that a contract for the loan? Is that, okay.
Exactly. So it's a mechanism to collect the repayments on that loan for a period of time, typically up to 20 years.
Thank you.
Councillor Buchanan.
Well, I support it as well, and through you, Mr. Chair, I just and the matching federal funds, like, you know. So, and as Councillor Brennan pointed out, the details to follow, but the letter is a great idea.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. I support this as well. I always think there's way to improve our homes and our buildings. And so this is a great start. And like you said, there'll be more information coming forward that then we can see exactly how much it is going to cost at that particular time.
Great. And Mayor Penko,
Yeah, I support as well. And just question of whether I think we would be eligible for potential capital from S. Support.
great. So CEO Morris.
Yeah, so through the chair, the mayor raises a good question about how we would structure it. So we'll have to work out the details, but we would write the letter on the premise that we're supporting the county program, and therefore we would expect to access the FCM funding through the county. As you read in the presentation, the county intends to set up, I guess, the structure to allow to administer the program. So ostensibly, we would look at paying our share of that administrative component to administer the program. But instead of, so to be clear, we wouldn't be pursuing our own FCM funding. We'd be pursuing it, and it would flow through the county.
Great. Seeing no other hands, I think we've got full support for this tonight. Okay, so thank you, CEO Morse. Moving on to the 2022 year-end reserve and trust fund balances report.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to this one, Mr. Chair. Our reserve management policy outlines a number of things, one of which is to report annually on the balances of our various reserve funds, and we do have many. So the report goes into a few definitions of what constitutes a trust fund versus an obligatory fund versus a discretionary reserve. So I won't go through all of that verbiage. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. I think what's important is the attachment showing the balances at the end of 2022. They will change, of course, at the end of 2023. We don't know what that change will look like until we finish off 2023, of course. But we did put some content in the financial section which demonstrates one element of our reserve policy. And it states that any surpluses or deficits are either contributed or drawn from the various reserves. So these are operating surpluses or deficits. Thankfully, we usually have a surplus. That was the case in 2022. So on page 3 of 5 of this report, you'll see where we followed the policy and we split 50% of the 3 surpluses. And to remind you, we have a capital or surplus that goes into capital, general capital. Then we have a water specific and a wastewater specific portion of our budget. So the surpluses in each of those 3 areas were distributed to on a 50-50 basis to the rate stabilization reserve at 50% and the capital reserve at 50%. You will notice that the wastewater one was not split 50-50. And the reason is each of those reserves has a target balance. And it's typically 20% of taxation of the taxation levy, or in the case of the utilities, it would be the revenue from that utility, either water or wastewater. So what's important to note is the wastewater reserve has reached its target capacity or limit of 546,000. So the balance, and according to our policy, the balance would go into the capital reserve for wastewater. So if you had questions about why it wasn't split 50-50, it's because we achieved the policy objective that council set for a balance in that reserve. So that's good news. I would point out that on the water side, the reserve is not close to being the target. The target is 542,000. At the end of 22, it's 87,000. So we don't have a very deep reserve on the water side. Wastewater we do. On the tax supported capital, we were almost at the limit or the ceiling, which is 3.4 million. We're at the end of 22, we were at 3.25 roughly. Those balances, and you'll see in the next report, actually in the same report, the next page, you'll see that they've been depleted significantly because we borrowed from those reserves to finance the 2023 capital program. So they're up and down all the time, and that's the way they're meant to be. But if you go to the next page, you'll see that the capital or tax supported capital, while we had a healthy starting balance, we contributed 1.7 from 2023 operations, but we committed or spent 4.2 to support the capital program in 2023. So there is a typo. It says 2.5 million. It's actually 2.7 as a starting balance or ending balance at the end of 22. And the projection at the end of 23 is 0.2 million or 200,000. That's not a lot of money in a tax supported capital reserve. We'll talk about that at budget time and how we can replenish that reserve. But you spent a lot of money this year on capital, and that's why the reserve is being depleted. So it's important to understand from year to year, they fluctuate. That's what they're supposed to do. But our challenge in 2024 will be to replenish the tax supported capital reserve. Hopefully, we are predicting a surplus at the end of 23. Again, half that surplus will go into the capital reserve. So I think really the focus of this report is the attachment, and it shows the various reserves, the balance at the end of 2022. Again, we'll bring this back once we have 23 numbers, but the good news is collectively the reserves equal about $7.26 million. So I think that's a number you should be proud of and happy with, but it does fluctuate. It's being driven in large part by robust building revenues that have been certainly propping up the building reserve. So you can go through and see them all. What's important is that many of the, some of these reserve funds are for a specific purpose, so we can't access it. The best example is the Perpetual Care Reserve. It's on here, it's called the Hillcrest Cemetery Trust. At the end of 22, the balance was about 570,000. We can't access that for anything other than capital commitments at the cemetery. So perhaps, Mr. Chair, I'll pause there and answer any questions.
Great, thanks, CEO Morris. Councillor McKenna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Morris, our reserve management policy and the 20% maximum target, is that something provincially legislated, the target, or is that in-house we decide when we're setting up our own, and why 20%?
Yeah, through the chair, that's a great question. It's not imposed by the province, okay. So you have autonomy over choosing that figure. I mean, at its core, the working fund reserve, or as it's called here, the rate stabilization, is basically monies we would need if 20% of the population did not pay their taxes. If that source of revenue stopped for some reason, then we would have enough working fund to pay our bills and pay our staff and keep the lights on. So there's no magic in that number. What I can say is we do need to look at some of our financial policies, particularly our financial strategy. So you will have an opportunity to have a discussion about the adequacy of 20%. But if you look at, our operating budget's roughly 25 million gross. So 3.5 million in reserve, I think, is a reasonable nest egg, so to speak, if something went sideways and we needed to access money. So, but certainly we can have that discussion at either at budget time or when we revisit our financial strategy and the policies. The reserve management policy is a big part of our overall financial strategy.
Just to have a follow-up, thank you. So if, is that the industry standard or our peers? Is that a good number? Or is it each individual municipality has to figure it out on their own, or is there a?
Yeah, so through the chair, I think that would be a great question for a financial type.
Okay.
But it depends on the municipality. It depends on, quite frankly, the amount of risk there is in collecting. It depends on the economy at the time. So for instance, at one time, when I came here, our arrears percentage was around 11 or 12%. So that's a risk that if you have that high of percentage. 20 is a threshold where the province starts to ask questions. So we were within that range. But you want to be in the 6 to 7% range. So, and we are now. So because that level of risk is lower, it would be rational to look at a lower percentage to have in reserve. That's a lot of money to tie up in reserve and not necessarily use it. So I would say there are variables depending on the state of the economy and the state of arrears in the municipality.
And on the capital side, if we update our asset management plan and we have a long-term view, then we have to know what we need to put away. So that would influence that target as well.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. If the capital demands are growing, and I think we can safely say they are, we may want to free up some of that money in a working fund reserve and put it into a capital reserve so we can use it and invest it as opposed to having it sit and not work necessarily as hard as it could if we were either investing it or putting it in an interest-bearing account.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion? Okay, thanks, Councillor McKenna and CEO Morris. That will move on to on the red tab again. Item 10.3 with Clerk Costello, the amending the Smith Falls for All Committee Terms of Reference report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bringing forward a report this evening asking if Council will consider adding 2 youth members to the Smith Falls for All Committee, as well as a member from the Smith Falls Police Service. We've had 4 meetings now of the Smith Falls for All group, and the whole point of the group is for inclusivity and diversity. And we feel that there's something missing not having some youth present on the committee. So we did get legal counsel on it just to ensure that we were safe having members who were under 18. As this isn't a committee of council or local board, it is permitted as long as it's written into the terms of reference. So they would form part of quorum. Obviously, they'd still have to adhere to rules like code of conduct, accountability and transparency, and all those other policies that all of you as elected officials need to adhere to. As stated, we'd also like to add 1 member of the Smith Falls Police Force to the group. So both of these would need amending the terms of reference. So with council's concurrence, we're looking to see if we could bring a bylaw forward at the meeting of council after this one.
Seeing nodding heads, no questions, comments?
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Clerk Costello. So next is our appointment of interim treasurer and updated banking resolution report.
Thank you. Just a note, if this was just the banking permissions, I probably would have put it under the consent reports on the agenda, which is a portion we haven't used yet. But I did include the appointment of Steve Dickey as our treasurer. And given that that requires a bylaw and is a legislative position, I didn't want to throw it in there in case there was any discussion. So as council can see from the report, we're looking to formally appoint Steve Dickey as the interim treasurer for the town of Smith Falls when Director Bowman retires from her post. With that change, we also need to update our banking procedures to name the appropriate staff. We've had some changeover with bylaw enforcement officers as well as now with the new treasurer. So all of this would be effective on the date of Director Bowman's retirement.
Great. I'm seeing nodding heads on that too. No questions. I
Thank you.
got the support. And last on our agenda is too many tabs going here, is with CEO Morris and the loan for the police building and pelletizer report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So back in 2013, Council made a decision to pass 2 bylaws to debt finance 2 significant projects. One was the renovation and fit up of the police building on Air Care Drive. The other was to purchase, I believe, a pelletizer at the wastewater treatment plant. So those loans were 20-year terms or amortization with a 10-year interest term on each. They're up for renewal. So RBC just reached out just last week, in fact, and advised that the 10-year renewal option comes at an interest rate of 5.79%. That's as of last Thursday, November 30th. Obviously, they're subject to change, but probably not in a big way. So we're bringing this forward because that would commit council for another 10-year period on each of those loans. We have a little bit of time until the 16th to make a decision. So we're bringing this forward to have a discussion about what we think would be most appropriate. So on page 2 of the report, you'll see our interim treasurer, Mr. Dickey, had reached out to RBC and was able to get a few interest rates for various fixed terms and a variable term loan. So we're bringing this forward this evening to get direction on where council would like to go, either the 10-year term as proposed or something shorter. This really is a discussion about predicting where interest rates are going to go. So we wanted to have that discussion this evening. The other part of the report is a concept we used recently, and that's borrowing essentially from our own reserves. So we just had the discussion about our reserves. So back in 2021, I think it was, 2021, we basically borrowed from ourselves to finance the LED light conversion project. So that seemed like a really good fit. We had enough capacity within the building reserve to borrow the money and pay it back over time. We will have fully paid it back to ourselves by 2026. So we bring this up because I think that's a strategy, as long as we have reasonably healthy reserves, that we should look at, particularly as interest rates are somewhat higher than they have been right now. But also to let you know that we're not necessarily suggesting these 2 loans that are up for renewal are the only ones that we could borrow from ourselves. We do have 4 more coming to maturity, or for renewal rather, not maturity, in 2024. So there will be more opportunities. And of course, we have some big capital projects coming up, the water tower in particular, that we may want to borrow internally as well. So we offer that as an opportunity, but not necessarily something you need to decide this evening on the 2 loans in question. We do, however, need to give the bank direction on the term that we want to go with for these 2 loans that are due. So, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll pause there.
Okay, thanks, CEO Morris. Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, I'm not, you're right. Like, you throw a dart at the wall to see where the interest rates are going to be, right? So we've gone with the 10. I would be interested to know, say we look at the lowest rate, which is 4, so it's 0.39 difference. What's that equate to in terms of numbers? Other than that, if it is a 10, which was, I believe, 4 to begin with, I can't see interest rates going low like they did before. But then again, I don't know. I'm not I let other people do that for me. So I'm not sure. I'll listen to my colleagues. The other thing I wanted to mention or point out is you mentioned there's 4 other loans coming due next year. And I know that we have a range of loans out there that we're paying for things, i.e. The arena, the water treatment plant, and little things like the senior center, which I think is paid off. But I would like to see a listing of those debts that we have, where we are in the amortization of them. And then that would give myself and my colleagues a good idea of when we're talking about borrowing money for, say, a water tower, then we know where we've been the last, 15, 20 years, because, the arena was built in 2010 and 11, I think, and still being paid for. Where are we on that payment? Where are we getting another 10 years or 15 years. I don't know. So I've seen it before, but that's been probably 4 or 5 years ago. So I'll let those more knowledgeable about interest rates. I mean, I'm fine with the 10, but you know, it would give us surety, and who knows what's going to happen. So and there's a financial planner.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. Mayor Panko.
Thank you. Yeah, rates are at a decades-long high. I think it's probably been over 20 years since we've seen rates at this level. And with the economy slowing, actually shrinking in the last quarter, there's some expectation that rates will start to decline next year. But there's a lot of things that can happen between now and then that provides no certainty. But I would be very hesitant to, let's say, lock in for 10 years at a decades-long high in rates. I have a feeling if we did go shorter term, we would benefit. I mean, it may not make a huge difference overall if rates have to fall a point or two, which is likely to happen for a couple of years at least. But I would still prefer we go shorter term. I do agree it's when we can borrow internally, very advantageous to us. But next year's probably a chance to do that. Maybe clean up the smaller loans that rather than renewing those small amounts. So I'm thinking even a year right now, I think we would be rewarded next year. I tend to expect we would be seeing something that's probably at least half a point lower, perhaps more, by the time this renews next year. But again, a lot can change, which we are not sure of, but I would be really hesitant to go long term on this.
Councillor McKenna.
Well, why not, Mr. Chair? Councillor Brennan brings up a good point, and it reinforces earlier comments I made around a multi-year look at our financial, maybe a 3-year forecast. So I'm hoping with our new treasurer coming in next year and the new budget cycle next year, we could have more of a 3-year forecast looking at all those things that Councillor Brennan's brought up. I think that would be, given the complexity of the world we're living in. As far as interest rates, I think the term they're using around the world is we're in polycrisis. There's wars and climate change and tremendous instability, strange elections around the world, and what will happen to interest rates. It's not a real stable environment that we're in, that we're living in. So, yeah, I would be comfortable with that 5-year 5.43. It saves us a little bit, doesn't lock us in. I think Mayor Panko mentioned a couple of years around this rate, and then maybe if it starts to drop, I think we wouldn't be in for the long haul. And if it goes up, we've got a couple of years to get ready for that. Yeah, it's a tough one to try and guess. And staff are brilliant. CAO and Mr. Dickey are clever people doing this job all the time. Any advice?
Yeah, the crystal ball isn't quite as clear as one would like it to be. Otherwise, I would have recommended Bitcoin 2 years ago because it's done very well. Yeah, I think all the indicators suggest that it's going to drop. So the savings really aren't in the difference between 5.79 and 5.43. The unknown savings are for the balance of the 7 years where we might be tied in at 5.79. My suggestion would be give the economy a chance to correct, and I would suggest 2 to 3 years is probably where we want to be.
Good. Thanks, Mars.
Do we have any worries about the banks? RBC, I saw their earnings. Are we worried that if we get a better deal, it might hurt their bottom line?
We had not considered the damage to our lender, but
okay,
historically it hasn't been overwhelming.
Okay.
So Morris, what's the penalty to refinance before the term's up?
That's a question I'm not able to answer, but I can get an answer for you and send that out tomorrow.
I guess my take on that would depend on that amount, because then that variable kind of comes into play with the rate. And what we're paying per year? Like if the rates were to go down and it's only X amount to refinance it, then there's less risk in going with one of those shorter options, right? Or a longer option. Like the 4-year, the 5-year at the 5.4. But without knowing that ballpark, it's kind of, yeah.
Yes, so there wouldn't, so if you decided this evening to go with a 3 or 4 year, there is no penalty for adjusting the loan term. It's only if you commit for 10 years and you want to switch to a lower, shorter term, that's when a penalty would apply.
Yeah, so I'm saying if we signed up for the 4-year 5.4, interest rates went down to 2% next month, what's the penalty to refinance? Just to bring that into the equation of how much more we'll spend. Mayor Penko?
Doing so. So I think we'd either make a decision to whatever decision we have. I think we're stuck with until that renews again.
Okay, so I'm hearing one for a 4.3 at 5-year. Do we need to make a decision tonight, or can we wait for the information that on the loan schedule? Or
We need to advise and take care of all the administration with RBC before the 16th, which is our first payment date. So I would encourage a reasonably rapid decision. Next week would still give us enough time, but it's getting really close.
Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, I'm ready to make a decision, and I'll take the advice that I just heard for like a 2-year, and then there's no penalty, and with God willing, the creek don't rise. It's going to be lower in 2 years.
Okay, I'm seeing 2 thumbs up for the 2-year.
Sure.
3, 4. Okay, so I'm seeing a consensus for the 2-year fix at 5.71. And the second part of that, I heard consensus for a report back to council or committee with the inventory of our loans and repayment schedules and interest and all that. So we'll send those 2 items for direction. Any further comments before we move on? Seeing none, we will go to committee, board, and external organization updates. Are there any updates for tonight?
I just want to be clear if this is where we report, because it also shows up in the council. I'm still trying to figure this one out. Is this where I would report on the health unit, or? Okay.
You could report on the health unit during at the council meeting during your reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the intention of this one then?
Or for staff.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a line like director updates that if it's not on the agenda, there's nothing to worry about.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I don't know, is it? I'm asking.
Nope, there's nothing on there this evening.
Okay. But it's not something that we solicit during the meeting, like updates during council?
Verbally, you can ask if there's any updates.
Okay.
If there's any that I know of, I would list them in there.
Okay. All right, so with that, we'll move to item 12.1, request for amendment to Legislation Act 2006. It's about the requirement to publish in local newspapers. I'm seeing nodding heads, so we'll send this to staff to bring it back to a future meeting. Great, no questions and comments, so we will look forward to seeing that probably early in the new year. There's no notice of motions, so with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that the committee adjourn its proceedings at 5:35 p.m. and stand so adjourned until the next duly called committee meeting. All in favor? So we will take a quick break and come back for council.